My name is Terra Plum. I am from Canada. I live in Calgary, Alberta, and I am an IFBB fitness pro. And I'm also a physiotherapist, or in the US, I think you guys would say a physical therapist. It's the same thing. I own my own physio clinic. Um, yeah, and kind of grew up always an active kid, grew up dancing, playing soccer, and then eventually got into fitness. I am like a mover. I need to move. It's hard for me to sit still. So if I'm not in the gym training, or if I ever got to a point where I wasn't in this cycle of an improvement season and a show season, this is my lifestyle, and some kind of activity will always be a part of my life. And in terms of work, you're absolutely right. Like, just the message that I so often will say to my clients is, anything's better than nothing. Our bodies need to move. Get out and go for a walk around your block, right? Like baby steps in the right direction just to get people moving, and to help people find what they might be passionate about in the realm of activity, so that they can find something that they of course can be consistent with. Because I do believe if it feels like a chore and it feels like work, it's really hard for people to stay consistent with that. So maybe it's that you take a dance class or a yoga class, or you have a meetup with a friend and you go for a walk, right? It doesn't have to be anything crazy, high intensity. Anything is better than nothing. And 10 minutes, 5 minutes of moving is better than 0 minutes. And so I say that many times a day to my clients. I really believe that's true.
And as a physical therapist, you kind of have like an in-depth understanding of how the body moves, like how it should move. Obviously, there's a general aspect of that, and there's a very specific aspect of that from an individual person's body's perspective. But you know, is there any? Do you kind of look at the body from his, I guess the body as well as like how it's been used from like a very historical aspect, like humans are built for these activities. Therefore, are there certain things that you kind of see, whether it be sports, whether it be activities in general, that may not be the best thing as far as like how the body is designed for, if you know what I'm trying to say?
I think typically what I think is important, and I try to incorporate this into my own training as well, is diversity. I think our bodies respond well to sort of, I guess, what we would call cross training, right? And exposing your body to different movement patterns and functional movement, right? So that when we're 70 and 80, we can get out of a chair without having trouble, right? Like projecting down the road and building that kind of functional strength so that people can age well and, climb a set of stairs comfortably. So I think diversity in activity is really important. Um, Sorry, what was the being able to do a number of different activities. And also, I really believe, like, if we look historically, that our bodies are just not meant to sit. And we live in a culture now where sitting is, unfortunately the norm for so many people with their work. And people are sitting, 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. And I just really like, I wholeheartedly believe that our bodies are meant to move and not meant to sit. And so a lot of the information I give to people is, again, do anything you can to break up that prolonged positioning of sitting, right? Stand up, move around, do some stretches, change positions, whatever that means, so that they can just get some blood flowing and get their joints moving. I think is really important.
And what do you see, obviously, working with people, what do you see as kind of like some of the biggest problems that people that they do face because of constant, sitting or whether it be with a job, obviously with entertainment now with television and just being on different devices, like what do you see are some of the biggest things? And it could be different for different ages, maybe the same for most of them, but some of the elements that you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing lots of neck pain, lots of back pain. I would say those are the two biggest ones. And then, the extreme version of neck pain is people get referred pain down into their arms, numbness and tingling in their arms. And the extreme version of back pain is sort of what people know as sciatic pain, where they get referral down their leg, numbness, tingling, weakness into their legs, right? And so those are the most common ones that we see, especially with prolonged sitting. And both of those can be really debilitating for people, neck and back pain. And the other thing I would say in terms of ages is, unfortunately, we are starting to see it earlier and earlier for people. So, kids who are spending, in my opinion, too much time here on their devices in, not a great position. That's how they're developing. They're growing in these poor postures because there's so much screen time or game time. And I think that could pose some problems down the road for a lot of people for those kids as they get older, for sure.
And what do those problems look like? Is there a certain fear, from a broad perspective, or is it just kind of like some of the same thing you're talking about, those problems just being more within a bigger population?
Yeah, I think they're more extreme versions of the same. So, something that starts out as oh yeah, my neck's a little bit tight at the end of my work day, turns into I have pain in my neck all the time when I'm sitting in my desk, turns into I can't sleep at night because my neck is so uncomfortable, turns into my hands are falling asleep because we know there's stuff going on in the neck that's radiating down into someone's hands. And ultimately turns into I can't do the activities I want to do, right? So there's kind of the full circle. People are in pain, and it's really counterintuitive to start moving when you're sore, right? And so it's like, okay, we have to back this up to that moment where you're like, oh, my neck's a little tweaky. Let's address that so that you can continue to do the things you love and move and be active. Because if it gets too far down the road and becomes, debilitating, then no, but people don't want to get off the couch because their back is too sore, their neck is too sore. But, that's a vicious cycle as well. And that eventually, kind of makes it all worse if people stop moving. So I think the key is to sort of intervene and educate people at the earlier stages of those things and just get them out of their desk, get them moving, get them sitting well, get them moving well, so that it doesn't get to that point where they really feel like they can't do anything in terms of activity.
I have a little bit of an experience with an internship in corporate wellness, I guess you would call it. It's very interesting, kind of the stuff that we did there, and you kind of mentioned it in some of the things we did of just like getting out and going on a walk during your lunch break. We did those. We did like desk and chair evaluations for
Ergonomic
ergonomics.
assessments.
Yes. We did that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. We did all kinds of stuff like different classes at different times and things. And, it's really interesting. But one of the things that I did encounter with some of that stuff was, and maybe for corporate big companies, it's a little bit different. Maybe they would cover more of the cost on that kind of thing. But, talking about maybe like a smaller company who can't afford a 500, 600, and I've seen, $1,000 office chairs. Like, what are some things you would recommend, very, very practical things people can use for, we want to get up, we want to do those kind of things when we can, but when we are sitting down, when we are at our desk, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a good chair makes a big difference. And you're right, they absolutely can be expensive. Um, Also, there's lots of different ergonomic. They now have like what's called a vertical mouse. So your hand is this way instead of this way, which affects everything sort of up your shoulder into your neck. So that's another piece of equipment, but it's not a super expensive one. Um, Making sure that your feet are flat on the floor, making sure that you're not crossing your legs. We all have habits, right? You always cross one leg over the other leg, and not the other way, right? And so that starts to create a different pull through your hips and your pelvis over time. So just being aware of those things, kind of resetting your posture. There also are more and more companies are getting people like sit, stand, desk options, right? Where you can raise your desk up and actually stand for a period of time, which is great ergonomically, just to change it up. And the biggest thing I think is starting at an early age. If you're someone in a career where you're sitting at a desk, yeah, you're fine through your 20s, you're mostly fine through your 30s, and then it starts to kind of catch up with people as they get into their 40s and 50s, and they say, well, I've been sitting at a desk for 20 years, like why now do I have this pain in the back of my shoulder? And it's like, well, you just told me you've been sitting at a desk for 20 years, and it does take time. It builds up over time, right? And so I think, I am a big advocate for prevention and sort of getting to things before they're an issue. So I guess if anyone's listening to this and you're in your 20s or 30s and you're sitting at a desk, this is the time to start to adopt some of those habits where you are getting up frequently. Maybe you don't have any pain yet. Great. Set a timer, make yourself get up from your chair, adjust your sit, stand, desk, get an ergonomic assessment, think about a vertical mouse, all of those things now so that it's not an issue down the road. I think that's a tricky thing for society in general. We tend to wait a little bit too long before we seek out a solution. And then it's like you're almost kind of too far down the rabbit hole at that point. And if we can think more preventatively from an earlier stage, we would be way better off, I think, in many realms, but definitely in terms of that.
Definitely. And when it comes to that preventative and start as young as you can, think about it as young as you can. Would it be realistic for somebody, like me, mid to late 20s to come to you, even if I'm not experiencing issues, what kind of program or what kind of, advice and things like that, other obviously than the stuff you just told me, but like, hey, make sure you're focusing on, if you're lifting weights, make sure you're focusing on these kind of things, or just generally for that younger individual, if they came to you, how would you work with them?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. We actually have sort of like and we call it an injury prevention assessment, but sort of we could say like a symptomatic prevention assessment, a symptom prevention assessment, right? Where we kind of do an assessment of people's movement patterns and their tendencies and get an idea of what they're doing in terms of their work and their lifestyle and their activities, and then start to look at, asymmetries, strengths, weaknesses, joints that aren't moving as well as they could be, that could potentially be a problem down the road, and addressing those in the clinic with some hands-on stuff, but then also, of course, sending people away and saying, you know what, you really need to focus on the position of this shoulder because it's not moving well. And although it's not causing you any trouble right now, if it continues to not move well, it will cause you symptoms down the road. So these are the things you need to do, now so that it isn't an issue down the road. I would say, like, in theory, that sounds great. In reality, we're very reactive. We're not innately proactive about these things, is what my experience has been. And so to get someone in the clinic in that scenario where they're looking to be preventative, we don't see that as much as we see the people who are in 7 or 8 out of 10. They can't do their regular activities of daily living, never mind their sports or their exercises. They're just in so much pain, and they're in because they have no other option. They can't do the things they want to do, right? So it's an interesting sort of mindset almost in the way that we tend to address things is reactively rather than proactively, I think, as a whole.
Right. And do you find it, or do you think, I guess, that it's just like by the nature of what people think of when they hear physical therapy or physiotherapy, that it's harder to get people to be more proactive.
I think a little bit, you're right, like what people kind of have in their mind as excuse me, what physical therapy is. But I also think we see it in other areas, right? Like you think about someone who goes to their doctor, they've had some, let's call it, okay, high blood pressure. They go to their doctor, they have high blood pressure, they're given meds to mitigate the high blood pressure. But like, how come 2 years ago they weren't under some sort of, preventative program for blood pressure in terms of new diet and nutrition and exercise? And it's like not until there's a problem is when there tends to be this need for intervention. So I think we see it in other realms as well. Like people, maybe they don't brush their teeth as much as they should or floss their teeth, and then it's like they have a cavity and they have to go get a cavity filling rather than doing what we know we should be doing to take care of our teeth before we have to go in and get a cavity filled. So I don't know, it's an interesting, like it's a very interesting way of thinking about healthcare in general. That idea of having a more preventative approach, in a lot of ways, that's not how our system, big broad healthcare system, is set up. People don't go to the doctor to get preventative advice. They go to the doctor once they're sick, right? And so I think, I think if we could change that, we would be better off. But it's a bigger thing than just physical therapy, I think.
And I think physical therapy too, it's associated a lot with the medical field with that, and it's associated just simply the word therapy, it's seen differently. And especially, I'm comparing it to like a personal trainer, comparing it to somebody who honestly like serves a lot of the same purposes in a lot of ways, but it's like a completely different thing to most people. There's the fitness side, there's the medical or the health side. And it's funny that it's so separate, like we're talking about how it should be one and the same. I don't know if this is true or not, but it almost feels like to me it's like it's like the outcome, whereas fitness, like a personal trainer, you don't go to them as much, at least, or you don't stick to going to a personal trainer as the outcome. It's the thing, it's like the alternative. Whereas physical therapy, it's somewhat of an alternative in a way, but it's not as much an alternative. It's almost like, oh, I have to go to the physical therapist.
Yeah, I think you're right, especially when someone is injured or is in pain. And absolutely, that's what the majority of people think about when they think about, oh, I have to go to physical therapy. It's like, oh, what did you do? What did you hurt? Right? That's sort of definitely how it's thought about. We at the clinic specifically try to shift that. We try to encourage people to sort of use it even as a tune-up, like the way you would compare it to a car. You take your car in and you get your car, maintenance done on your car. Why would you not do that for your body, right? Like it's all you have. We only get one. And so, maintenance for your own body seems like it should be, in my opinion, at the top of the list of things to maintain. And everyone's very good at maintaining their car and their furnace and their house and their plumbing and their, all of those things. And we see the body as no different, or maybe even like a higher priority than those other things in terms of just maintaining it. And so having appointments sort of frequently throughout the year, every 4 to 6 weeks, even if you don't have anything that's really causing you a ton of pain, every 4 to 6 weeks, to just sort of keep it that way, right? And make sure that everything is good to go and you can keep being super active in whatever activities you want to do.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Move Your Body Apparel, a Lexington-based, community-ran premium activewear brand that promotes the importance of daily movement. For the rest of the year, MYB is donating a percentage of every order to the Special Olympics of Kentucky. Save 20% off your first order with the link below or use code TWR20 online at mybapparel.com.
You know, as we get more technologically advanced in regards to like medical technology and how we can stay alive longer, how do you see that impacting and kind of almost even throwing out the fact that we already kind of are in a bad place physically? But how do you see like increased longevity from an age perspective coming together with our natural, anatomy and physiology?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly it, is the quality of life and the habits that people have for themselves through their whole lifespan, right? Because if we're finding ways for our organs, for our brains to sort of live longer, well, great. But what about your musculoskeletal system? Like, you want to live longer and you want to be able to walk, I presume, and you want to be able to move. And so, I'm maybe a little biased, but I think strength training is really important. I think maintaining, bone density, maintaining muscle mass and strength, especially as we age, everyone, we start to lose muscle mass. And so to maintain strength, to lift weights, to load our joints, load our bones, load our muscles, I think that is super important. And, again, you have to think, what do you want the quality of your life to look like? So if we're 110 and our kidneys and our livers and our hearts and our brains are just fine, but we can't get out of bed, is that how you want to live? Like, I think it's really about quality of life and being able to move all the way through our whole lifespan. And that looks different, of course, for people as they age, but I think it's super, super important. And I think strength training is really important for everyone.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating how some people can you see people who, and of course, that it does come down to the habits, it does come down to a lot of things, but just simply because of their genes, they can't do certain things. Like they do compared to someone who is 90 years old and running a marathon. I just think it's crazy how there's such a difference in that small percentage that is different in all of us, how it can be so drastic and how it can, it just makes me wonder like what the true, it's so hard to know because we are, I feel like, living so far away from the way the, quote unquote, naturally live. Like what, we know the average lifespan of a gorilla in the wild and a tiger in the wild and a lion in the wild. Like what's the natural lifespan of the bones, of the muscles, of the heart, of the, all these different things? How much of a favor have we done ourselves? And how much can we climb? Are we climbing out of a hole? Are we climbing, higher on the mountain? I guess is kind of what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, there's a lot of gray area for sure. And I think there's probably a lot that we don't know, but I would say what we do know is that moving is good. Movement is good. Any kind of movement. And, that 9-year-old running a marathon, the effort or the exertion on the body for that individual could be the same as that 70-year-old walking around the block or walking through the mall. I think it's very individual. I think our need for movement varies from person to person. I think our tolerance for exertion varies from person to person. And so what works for one person might be very different than the next. But I think, that's where I feel really passionate about just trying to help people find what works for them. They're not going to necessarily, I'm not saying they have to train the way I train to stay healthy, but they have to find something that works for them that involves moving their bodies. And that could look really different. And many different ways. The duration can be different. The exertion can be different. The, resistance can be different. The frequency can be different. All of the variables can change. But again, going back to sort of where we started, like anything is better than nothing. And for sure, there's a lot of gray area around, the medical profession and some of the new things and technologies and lengthening lifespans. There's a lot of moving parts, I think, and variables that we may or may not have control over. But I think that's when it's just like, for each individual person, let's control what we can and find what works. And of course that morphs with time too, right? So the way I'm training right now is probably different than the way I'll train in 10 years, and is definitely different than the way I was training 10 years ago. So yeah, it's a journey for sure for any given individual, I think.
So you mentioned at the beginning, being in bodybuilding in the fitness division. How'd you actually get into bodybuilding?
Yeah, so I grew up dancing and playing soccer. Those are like my big activities, sort of growing up and through high school and through university. And then I kind of got to a place where I wasn't dancing as much. And I had a friend who was like, oh, have you ever tried a personal trainer? And I thought, no, but I've always thought about it. But like, you want to find the right person. And she said, oh, you should try my trainer. She's really fun. She does some really sort of different, unique stuff. You should give it a try. You can do, at the time, I think like a couple free sessions or whatever before you really commit to anything. And so I kind of felt like, well, there's nothing to lose. I'll give it a try. So I did those free trial sessions with the trainer, and of course really enjoyed it. And then 6 months, so I continued on doing some personal training sessions with this trainer. And then 4 to 6 months after I started, I was like, okay, now I'm what are some goals? I'm very goal oriented, as I think we all are in this industry. And like, what are some goals that I could look at sort of over the next 6 months to a year? What's reasonable? And here I am thinking, they had like the in-body body comp. Let's try to get my, muscle mass to a certain point, or body comp to a certain point, or, I want to be able to do a couple pull-ups or whatever, those kinds of goals. And she was the one that said, well, with your dance background, like if you wanted to do a show, you could probably do the fitness division. It tends to be a smaller division, think about it. And at the time I was like, no, like there's no way. I cannot even imagine you're telling me my goal should be to put on a bikini and walk out on stage in front of people and pose. Like that just seemed so far out of my comfort zone. So I kind of like let it simmer for a while, as I do, and slept on it. And I think I had a trip, so I was away for a little bit, and then I came back and I was like, kind of dove in, and I was like, okay, I'm ready. Let's try this. Let's see what we can do. And I didn't really know barely anything about the sport. And we prepped for a show. I did my first show in 2015, and yeah, kind of got hooked on, the process. I love the process, which I think you have to in this industry. I love the process. And then in terms of fitness, it's super fun because you always have skills that you're working on. And just when you think like, okay, I've got this set of skills now to put together into routine, and it's like, oh, but I still want to work on that one other handstand move, or that one other hold, or that one other, like there's always room for improvement. And I think that's true, especially like for sure for fitness, but of course for all the other categories too, right? There's always room for improvement, and you just keep raising your own bar higher and higher and higher each season. And, that's really motivating too, as an individual, as you just sort of see from year to year, you see the progress and you see what you're able to do. And and I just love it. Like now I truly love training. I love going to the gym. I love lifting heavy. I love working on the fitness skills. I love the structure of it. So here we are, however many, that was 2015. So many years later and many, many shows later.
Whenever you decided to do that first show, I mean, was it just like, hey, let's do this for the experience? Let's do it as like a motivation to keep going, keep kind of training? Like did you see it evolving into anything what it is?
Yeah, no, I didn't see it evolving. At the time, I don't even think I had the knowledge to know where or what it could evolve into, right? Like I wasn't, unlike some of my fellow fitness competitors, I wasn't sort of a bodybuilding fan before I got to where I am now, right? So I didn't know about the industry. I didn't know what Olympia was. I didn't know how you get, you get a pro card and then you can do pro shows. Like that was all like, I had no idea about any of that when I did my first show. It was kind of, as you said, just like, this seems like a good goal. Let's sort of buckle down and see what we can do. And put together a routine, which at the time was mostly dance, because that was what I knew. That was my background. But yeah, like I never in a million years even knew where you could go in this sport. Never mind, thought I would, be here a couple Olympias later. So
It's so funny, how many people really do say like, was just seeing what would happen, or just, trying it out, that where that leads. And I think it just goes to show, like, if you just dedicate time and effort and energy into something, it will reward you in some way. You may not be like, you may not be successful per se in that given thing even, but it'll lead you to something. And I think it's so cool how that happens. But at what point did you start to take it more um into like the competitive realm in your own mind? Like, hey, I want to compete, I want to win.
I think so. I got my pro card in 2018. I mean, back to your previous comment, absolutely. I think finding like that motivation and that drive and that commitment to something, I think that really transfers to anything in your life, right? So, if you can get through a prep, which has its challenges, then you're going to be able to use those skills to do something else that's challenging, or do something else that's challenging. And then the reward that comes from going through that challenging process, right? I got my pro card in 2018 at Vancouver Pro. So like July of 2018. And then I switched coaches sort of in January of 2019. So sort of 6 months after I got my pro card. And I would say that is when things sort of shifted from, yeah, this is something I kind of do for fun and, to more of a lifestyle, that was the first year where I really tracked sort of nutritionally through a good off season or improvement season, into then prepping. So that was sort of that full, now this is a 365 days a year thing, not a 16-week prep as it had been for my first couple shows.
At what point did your clinic get involved like in your life, and then like having bodybuilding too, at what point did that happen? And then like, how did you manage that? How do you have the, the bandwidth, I guess, to be able to, man, I mean, my dad owns a small business for, the last 40 plus years. So I know how much goes into it. I know how much goes into, not from a personal perspective, but just talking to people into the bodybuilding lifestyle. Like how can you effectively do both?
Yeah, so I opened my own clinic in 2016. So it was all kind of around that same time. I would say now, I mean, have a really great team of people that work with me. So that certainly helps. And I mean, there's pros and cons to running your own business. It's a ton of work, but it also allows for some flexibility in terms of scheduling. So I typically treat clients sort of afternoons into the evenings, which works well for them, like the 9 to 5 sort of regular work day people. And that allows me my mornings to get my workouts in. So I get up and get my workouts in the morning, training, cardio, and then head to work. And it also allows me to, some flexibility in terms of traveling for shows, which I always have to do. There's nothing local here right now. So I certainly appreciate that. And it's, I'm running a business. The emails come to my email, the phone calls come, so it is like a 24/7 kind of job. And I can be flexible in terms of really focusing on training in the mornings. And really, like, I think it's evolved. It's taken some time, but I feel like I've gotten to a point where I can create some boundaries and sort of put my blinders on when I'm at the gym, when I'm working on my fitness routine, and just focus on that. And then, of course, give 100% to my clients at work when I'm there as well. So yeah, I mean, you just make it work. I think those of us in the industry, that's kind of who we are as individuals. It's like you said, you are dedicated and motivated to excel in this one part of your life. So of course you're dedicated and motivated to excel as a business owner, or whatever your job is, or as a parent, or as a, whatever, that all those other things, like, you want to do well at all of them. And so it's a bit of a juggling act sometimes. And those last couple of weeks before a show where my brain is in super like prep peak week mode, it certainly has its challenges. But
this episode is brought to you by Move Your Body Apparel, a Lexington-based, community-ran premium activewear brand that promotes the importance of daily movement. For the rest of the year, MYB is donating a percentage of every order to the Special Olympics of Kentucky. Save 20% off your first order with the link below, or use code TWR20 online at mybapparel.com. This podcast is sponsored by Smoking Gun Coffee, a veteran-owned coffee company that strives to give back to those in need. Don't forget to use code TWR10 for a 10% discount at checkout.
Do you ever find that like that the fact that you do have these two very important things almost refreshes you when you go back to the other one?
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the diversity of it. I know there are a lot of people in the industry who compete and work as trainers, for example, or online coaches, and props to them. I think that's really cool. For me, I appreciate having sort of my two separate worlds, and work and sort of my prep, my training. There's not a lot of overlap, other than like my passion for just making sure people stay active, right? But yeah, I like when I'm at the gym to train, and then I leave the gym and I go to my clinic and I work, and so I appreciate having those two distinct worlds or bubbles, if you will. But I know there's a lot of people that go and they work out, they train at the gym, and then they eat their meal at the gym, and then they have a day full of clients or whatever that looks like, right? And I appreciate the diversity for sure.
So being in fitness, the fitness side of bodybuilding, the category, the division, there's obviously like another added aspect, another added layer, right? So that in and of itself adds a little bit of risk, of injury, of overtraining, things like that. How do you utilize the skills of being a physical therapist? How do you utilize kind of some of those skills to make sure, or if something does happen, hey, I know a little bit kind of more what to do than maybe the average person?
So two things I've learned or experienced recently or told myself recently. One is, less is more, and I try to start the process of creating a routine pretty far in advance, so that I trust that process months and months leading up to a show, and that I have this routine and I've done it many, many times. so that if something does happen in terms of an injury close to the show, which actually did happen this year before the Arnold UK, I had a knee injury. And I think had I not prepared so well in the months prior, I would have really freaked out about that. But I knew I was in a good place. I knew I was in a place where, you know, even if I can't run my full routine because of this knee until I'm there and I do it on stage, it's going to be okay because I've done it enough times. I know it. I trust that I can get through it. I trust that, you know, I can do the skills. So preparation, I guess, is a part of that, so that if you do have an injury or a little bump in the road that might set you back or take you out of doing certain skills for a period of time before a show, I think it's more of a mental thing, but I can still have the confidence that, you know, it's okay. Like, yeah, my shoulder's hurt. I can't do those handstand skills, or I can't do those flying push-ups or whatever, but I've done them enough. It's not a big deal. I'm not going to stress about it. So preparation for sure. And then, you know, I just try my very best, and knock on wood, I've been pretty lucky with injuries. I had a knee thing before the Arnold, but other than that, I've been very fortunate. And I think that is mostly due to, if I start to feel the beginning of anything, I'm on it pretty quick, and I'm rehabbing it, I'm rolling it, I'm stretching it, I'm scraping it, I'm needling it. You know, I do dry needling. And so sometimes I'll be doing that to myself. You know, whatever it takes, so that little tweaky sort of 1 or 2 out of 10 doesn't get any worse. And so I try to just get on it as soon as possible.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's amazing to me how, you know, you can on show day and the week or two prior, how you know you're so drained, how you're so physically, mentally, and emotionally, I guess, too, kind of drained. And then you have to not just step on stage, but you also have to perform this thing, and you have to remember it, and you have to physically be able to do it on this in this state that it's so different from other sports. Like, you know, you would never imagine like a football player or basketball player being like, you know what, I'm going to do the week before, I'm just going to eat as little as I can and drink, you know, and I'm not going to, you know, do my normal routine as far as like, you know, all this other stuff. I'm just going to, you know, deplete myself and see how well that goes. But that's something that you guys have to do. And I think it's so crazy that it works out as well as it does.
Yeah, you're right. It is something we have to do. And I will say there's nothing like the feeling of getting through your routine at a show. It's very difficult to reproduce that. You know, whether it's you're dried out a little bit, you're depleted a little bit, there's some adrenaline, you're in a different space, there's lights, there's whatever all the factors are. It's very hard to reproduce that in sort of a quote unquote practice setting. We are fortunate that usually at most shows we have our posing round, and then we have a few hours before finals where we do our routines. So you kind of figure out what works in terms of hydrating and eating, getting some carbs and fats in before you do your routine. So that certainly helps. But it is definitely a science. And, you know, I have gotten to the point where I think I kind of know what works for me in that short span of time between pre-judge and finals. Because you don't, you know, it's just the worst feeling to be on stage and be 3/4 of the way through your routine and just feel like your legs are just jello, you know, or that something's cramping, or you have no, you know, all of a sudden each leg weighs 200 pounds and you have to jump up, and that sucks. So that just comes with experience, I think, of sort of trial and error, figuring out what works between pre-judge and finals so that you can perform optimally for your routine. Some of the European shows, it's kind of a one show format where, like, I did a show in Spain in 2020, and it was like pre-judge, and then we had very little time. We just stayed at the venue, basically changed into our routine costumes and did our routines really quick. And to me, because I don't have as much experience with that sort of version of it. I think you're exactly right that it's like a mental thing. So I probably stepping on stage with a bit more of a, well, I guess we'll see how this goes attitude, rather than that confidence of like, I know this is going to go really well and I'm going to feel really good through the full 2 minutes of my routine. But, you know, again, you're all in the same boat and you do the best you can. We actually had a show in 2021 where they switched the rounds on us, actually. So we did, so that was extra fun. We actually did our routines first, and then we did our posing round. So I am super grateful for my coaches through that weekend, because they were very helpful, because I was a bit lost, right? It's just different. It's a different order. You think, well, I don't want to like drink and eat too much before my routine, because then you're going to be all watery and then you have to pose, and what is that going to be like? And, you know, and again, it's just like, it's another experience. You add it to the list of experiences. And I think the big picture with all of this is, you do something that sort of seems like it's going to be challenging, and then you do it and it's like, yay. And maybe it goes better than planned. Maybe it doesn't go as well as planned, but you've learned something about it and something about the process, and maybe what you can do better next time. So it's all about the experience, I think.
So stepping on that Olympia stage, what is it like to just be up there, and almost, what is that kind of like relationship in that mental state like? Because, you know, for a lot of people, you hear about these competitors and it's like, oh my gosh, this person's going to be there, or this person qualified, or oh my gosh, I'm going to be, you know, standing next to this person or see them backstage or whatever, and get to interact with these people. You know, what was that like for you though, just to be able to stand up there with, you know, the best in the world?
I mean, I love it. I love all those fitness girls. I think it's a really unique division, because we have this mutual respect for one another. I think there are very few people who fully understand what goes into competing in fitness, and what that's like, as you said, to get up there depleted, do some backflips, you know, jump around for 2 minutes, put on this entertaining performance. So, I mean, I respect every single one of those women that I stood up on stage with so much. And, you know, and we're friends. So it's, you know, you're excited to be at Olympia, but you're also excited to see your friends and excited to share the stage with them. And so thrilled that you have that opportunity to share the stage. And it's I mean, it's a great experience to, of course, have the opportunity to step on the Olympia stage. Plus, you're going to see some of your best friends that, for me, some of them I hadn't seen in a while. And then when it comes down to actually competing, again, I sort of have my, what works for me before my routine. I usually have some headphones in. It was kind of interesting in Vegas, actually, because the Wi-Fi in the venue was really terrible. And this playlist that is my go-to pre-routine backstage playlist. I didn't realize this, but somehow it wasn't like, it needed the Wi-Fi. It wasn't downloaded or something weird. And so it wouldn't play, and it wouldn't play, and it wouldn't play. But anyway, I got my playlist finally to work, and I kind of just zone out with my headphones on. We do our routines alphabetically and by last name. And so I'm almost always towards the end, like I'm in the last sort of quarter of the lineup. So feels like a long wait, right? Even from the time they start, you're waiting a lot. They had a screen backstage, so we could watch the routines before us. And I found that I watch bits and pieces. But, you know, I'm not really in a place where I'm like truly taking it in, right? I'm kind of in my own little world, headphones in, until like the routine that's right before me. Then I pull my headphones out. So that's kind of what works for me to stay calm. I think that's a really big one. before a routine is to not let your adrenaline and excitement sort of spike prematurely because you don't know how long that wait is. And so you want to just manage the stress and manage the adrenaline as best you can before you get up there. And then that venue, man, like I think there's 7,000 people. You're in the Zappos Theater at Planet Hollywood. Like it is a big venue. I sat in there Saturday night and watched finals and thought, geez, I'm glad I didn't sit in here before Friday night finals to see like how many people are here and how big it is. But you know, truly like what an honor to be on that stage. That whole weekend was an incredible experience. Again, so much respect for all the other fitness competitors. It was a great weekend. I don't know what more to say. Like it was super fun.
And going through your mind as you're waiting for your name to be called to go out there, is it, you're talking about kind of like you're in the zone in your own little world, but is there a lot of thought like in your own head going on? Is it like you're trying to control the thoughts, or is it almost like a little bit of trying to just block out everything and only kind of focus on maybe the music or whatever it is, try not to think too much?
Yeah, I mean, naturally I'm a thinker. I know that about myself. And so I really try to not do too much of that backstage. I don't overanalyze. I don't think about what anyone else is doing in the routine. I really don't. At that point, I mean, really at any point, there's no good reason to think about what anyone else is doing in their prep. But certainly at that point, it's not going to serve you any favors. And so I think the biggest thing for me is to stay in a mindset where I can just stay confident and know what my strengths are and trust in the process leading up to that day. And I think if you put the work in through your prep season and for Olympia, I mean, I had done that routine twice at two other shows before Olympia. So the confidence of, I've already done this successfully twice on stage. I feel good about it. I know I can get out there and have fun and perform. And then really have fun with it, right? Like I do love performing. I do love being on stage. I love being in front of the crowd. And so, just to soak in that experience and that opportunity to do what I love to do in front of this wonderful crowd. I was just focused on that and focused on, just doing my very best and not really too concerned at all about what anyone else was doing in terms of their routines.
You mentioned staying focused. How do you stay focused, or do you maybe not, as weird as it sounds, do not focus on it? But during the weekend as a whole, you have so much going on in the Olympia weekend. Do you almost like partition your mind off, like, hey, this is what we're doing at this time, we're doing this other thing at this time, and then when it comes to the show time, we'll focus solely on that? Like, how do you stay focused, or is it just kind of focus on the moment that's right in front of you?
I think it honestly depends on the show and the weekend and where, like, kind of my mood. Like sometimes I feel like I'm quite like I'm wanting to do other things sort of those days leading up to it. And sometimes I feel like I really just need to sort of rest and chill and be in the hotel room and during those times, like I'm not chilling and like, ruminating over my routine or my skills or my posing. Like I'm not really thinking about that. And again, I think that comes down to feeling confident in the work I've done leading up to that weekend. So I kind of feel like once I arrive, really you've put in the work. I do my check-ins with my coach frequently those few days leading up to the show, and just sort of trust in the process and trust that I'm bringing the best package that I can. And Olympia is a tricky weekend because you're like they have like our Meet the Athletes event, for example, which is super cool. And the bodybuilding fans, are lined up for miles to come in and do Meet the Athletes. And I know, like, so I, of course I was there and signed some autographs and all that fun stuff. And then sort of pulled myself away at whatever, 8:45 or whatever time, I kind of had a plan, like I'm going to go back and sort of conserve some, not even physical energy, but just that like mental energy, that output. Because that was Thursday night before we had to get up and do our prejudge Friday morning. So I think just managing your energy, like physical energy, mental energy, emotional energy, so that you can be in a place on show day to really soak it all up and enjoy it and, present your best possible package.
Kind of looking forward into the new year, into 2023, what does it look like for you, and what kind of goals do you have kind of set forth?
Yeah, well, we're waiting on Arnold invites as we speak. So it would be amazing. So I did the Arnold UK, but I actually haven't done an Arnold Classic. So that's certainly a bucket list show that's coming up the first weekend of March. And as you know, it's like an invite only show. So my understanding is that Friday this week, they're sending out invites and they'll post the lists of competitors. So that would be truly like an amazing experience to have the opportunity to do the Arnold Classic in Ohio in March. So certainly I will plow forward and do that if I get an invite. And if I don't, then, we're in a good place to do a bit of a reverse diet and build. My feedback is still, like, actually, my feedback has gone from just like, build everything needs to be bigger. We're getting a little more specific now to like some more density and width through my back, my V taper. So to put some time and effort into a good long improvement season and see where we're at. Like, it's going to be a shorter season. There are going to be fewer shows to qualify for Olympia 2023. And also they've done away with the point system. So I think, especially for fitness, we're going to be a smaller group represented at Olympia 2023. And so, if I was able to qualify, that would be amazing. If not, like, do I take a full year and just really try to make some improvements and, kind of gun for 2024? I don't know. I guess, to be honest, at this point, I'm just sort of taking one day at a time and seeing what happens with the Arnold, I guess, and then kind of going from there. But, I think that's one of the draws to the sport is there are always improvements to be made. There are always sort of new ways you can approach a reverse diet, an improvement season. There's so many variables that you can manipulate to sort of optimize that improvement season. So
yeah,
I would just look forward to that. You can't be complacent in this sport. You can't just, take a year off and not do anything, because who wants to get on stage and look the same or worse than they did the previous season, right? And I think if you talk to anyone, even those top 5 competitors in any division at the Olympia, they're already back at the drawing board. They're thinking, what are they going to do over the next 12 or I guess 10 months, as the case may be, to bring an even better package, right? And so we are blessed that we have this sport to keep pushing our own individual limits. And exactly that, like, where, there's always room for improvement. And at the same time, I ask myself, like, how does this end? Because there's always, like, it never really feels like there's always momentum and there's always improvements to be made. And I think you can get addicted to that and addicted to the progress and the process. And, like, I don't know the answer to the how does it end question, but it's certainly kind of an interesting thing to think about. And I think, as we said before, like, the lessons you learn through bodybuilding and show prep and facing certain challenges and, you know, the people that you meet, but all of those lessons carry over into life outside of bodybuilding. And I think that's a really important message, that if and when the time comes when it is time to step away from the stage, this is always a part of my life. This lifestyle is my lifestyle, whether I'm competing or I'm not competing. I want to, you know, I will always be active. I will always go to the gym. I will always eat healthy. Because I feel good, right? It's not about looking a certain way. I am energized by those things, and that's what makes me feel my best. And then, yeah, some of the lessons around just persevering through challenges and roadblocks, and having that sort of confidence to trust in a process, whether it's a prep process or a business plan process, or a, you know, like that trust, that confidence. I think that carries through into many, many aspects of our lives, right? Even if we're not still stepping on stage.
Yeah, without a doubt. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. It was really cool to get to talk to you tonight.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This is great.